The president teased new tariffs on semiconductors, tariffs that could be set as soon as next week. Those tariffs, he hinted, could range anywhere between 200% and 300%. It's bananas, it's berserk, and it's a little bit crazy all at once, remarked one observer. President Trump has just announced that he will impose very steep tariffs, ranging from 200% to 300% on semiconductor chips. The policy is set to take effect in the coming weeks. His objective was made clear: to force technology and electronics companies to bring their production lines back to the United States, or else face massive costs from the tariffs. This strategy resembles a carrot-and-stick approach. Initially, lighter duties are imposed. But if businesses continue to operate factories abroad, the tariffs will soar. In other words, those willing to relocate production to the United States will receive preferential treatment. But those who remain stubborn will be hit hard. I'll be setting tariffs next week, and the week after, on chips, on semiconductors, Trump said. They don't open here, they have to make them here. In some cases, 200%, 300%. This announcement is seen by supporters as tangible proof of Trump's commitment to bringing manufacturing back. Yet, on closer inspection, beneath the grandiose rhetoric lies a policy that serves more as a warning than a clear solution. The problem is that it lacks a stable roadmap, one on which businesses can reliably plan. And the current situation is far from simple. The United States and China remain locked in a tense standoff, especially after threats emerged of new tariffs tied to China's purchase of oil from Russia. Meanwhile, China continues to be the primary supplier of rare earths to the United States, a reality that only heightens the strategic importance of Canada's resources. Several critical minerals essential for chip production are now closely tied to Canadian supply, leaving Washington on the defensive. Because tariffs cannot alter the fact that America is still dependent. Trump floated the idea of exemptions for companies manufacturing inside the United States. But how would that even work? He keeps saying, come this time next year, all the manufacturing will happen here, yet there is no evidence of those plans materializing. Bringing an entire semiconductor supply chain back home within a single year may sound simple. In reality, it is virtually impossible. This industry depends on infrastructure that cannot be built overnight. From advanced fabrication plants and clean rooms, to lithography machines that require enormous amounts of money and time. Not to mention the highly skilled workforce of engineers and technicians required. You cannot suddenly conjure up thousands of them in the blink of an eye. The critical factor remains access to raw materials. At present, essential minerals such as gallium, cobalt, and graphite are still largely imported. And China continues to serve as the main supplier of rare earths to the United States. As Washington and Beijing face off over a host of geopolitical flashpoints, the risk of supply chain disruptions looms large. Imposing tariffs may create headlines, but it does nothing to resolve the shortage of raw materials on which a modern economy depends. And this is precisely the moment when Canada steps into the spotlight. Beyond its wealth of oil, gas, and uranium, Canada also holds substantial reserves of critical minerals for the high-tech sector. An advantage that cannot be underestimated. Former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney even alluded to this, when outlining how British Columbia could provide leverage in a tariff battle with President Trump. But why? What's German about germanium? If the United States does not receive this rare metal from the Teck smelter in Trail, British Columbia, it simply isn't available at all. Germanium is now being talked about more than ever. It is indispensable in the production of advanced chips and specialized optical components. Things that ordinary silicon cannot deliver. In North America, the largest supply comes from a mining and metallurgical complex in British Columbia. Roughly 1,500 workers are employed there. According to industry experts, this facility plays a pivotal role in the next generation of electronics and defense technologies. As US-China tensions escalate, the strategic value of Canada's resources will only grow clearer. Washington may choose to impose additional tariffs on metals imported from Canada or on goods outside the USMCA framework. But saying it is easy is far different from doing it. Replacing germanium or many other essential minerals from Canada is anything but simple. That is why Ottawa holds a crucial lever, one that tariffs alone cannot undermine. In fact, if Washington applies excessive pressure, it could inadvertently fracture the very supply chain it is trying so hard to protect. And Canada is not standing still. Rather than rushing into a hasty and disadvantageous deal, Prime Minister Mark Carney is opting for a slow but steady path. Strengthening domestic production capacity. Preparing for longer-term moves. We'll talk about steel, autos, new sectors of the economy, artificial intelligence, and what we're doing in terms of making Canada competitive, Carney explained. At a meeting in Ottawa this past August, between the Prime Minister and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, both leaders made it clear. To safeguard the steel, automotive, and semiconductor industries, Canada is preparing to defend its position calmly, strategically, and with resources the United States cannot ignore. Canada must proactively strengthen its internal competitiveness. At the same time, it must ramp up investment in artificial intelligence. Instead of constantly reacting to Washington's erratic decisions, Canada has chosen a different path. It is reinforcing the foundations of its domestic economy. Financial supports are being directed towards sectors most affected by U.S. tariffs. In parallel, Ottawa is pushing forward with the development of critical minerals. More than 10 major projects are already underway in British Columbia. Together, their combined value reaches into the tens of billions of Canadian dollars. These projects make Canada's objective unmistakable: to establish itself as a reliable supplier in the global supply chain. Ottawa is not backing down under U.S. pressure. On the contrary, it is turning the challenge of tariffs into a catalyst for building sustainable growth. In the end, whether Washington imposes tariffs at 200% or 300% may grab headlines. But a factory cannot be built in a matter of months. Nor can critical minerals simply appear when needed. Without stable supply, and without cooperation from partners such as Canada, the U.S. dream of a self-sufficient industrial base will remain an empty promise. What is unfolding now is not merely about tariffs or retaliation. This is a genuine contest between political declarations and economic reality. And in that game, Canada holds more strong cards than Washington is willing to admit. America is the country that started the AI race, Trump declared. And as President of the United States, I'm here today to declare that America is going to win it. But when it comes to AI data centers, they are an order of magnitude more power-hungry than the server farms of the early Internet age. Since August 1, negotiations between the United States, China, and Canada have remained deadlocked. No breakthrough is in sight. Meanwhile, Trump's latest rounds of tariffs run counter to America's surging demand for energy and critical minerals. The very foundations needed to drive AI development and expand domestic manufacturing. Behind the sensational headlines lies a truth Mr. Trump can hardly avoid. The United States is heavily reliant on raw materials from Canada. And in the global race to dominate semiconductors and AI technology, if Washington severs that connection, it will be the Americans who suffer greater losses, not Ottawa. The biggest concern, industry experts warn, and the one the industry itself must address, is energy usage. It's just huge. The industry and the energy producers have got to figure that out. They must find a better way of providing that energy. Mr. Trump's latest tariff policy collides head-on with America's soaring energy demand. The very energy that is indispensable for powering AI data centers, and for fulfilling the ambition of reshoring semiconductor manufacturing. The proposal to impose a 100% tariff on imported chips is designed as leverage. It is meant to force corporations to pour capital into U.S. facilities, or build new factories directly on American soil. Take Apple, for example. The company has announced plans to invest up to $100 billion in new domestic projects. But what many overlook is the enormous electricity these complexes consume. In Virginia, regarded as the world's largest data center hub, Dominion Energy forecasts that power demand could double within just 15 years. AI campuses alone could consume more than 1 gigawatt of electricity. That is the equivalent of powering an entire small city. And Virginia is not an exception. From the dense server corridors of Oregon to the booming tech clusters in Texas, AI data centers are multiplying. What they require most is clear: a stable, abundant, and uninterrupted power supply. On top of that, reshoring the entire semiconductor industry will only add greater strain to the grid. Everything hinges on having an energy supply that is both large enough and reliable enough. And this is precisely the moment when Canada's role can no longer be ignored. So when I talk about being an energy superpower, Mark Carney often says, I always mean both clean and conventional energies. So what does that mean? Yes, it does mean oil and gas. It means using our oil and gas. But it also means more exports. Without question. Canada currently holds the position of being the largest energy supplier to the United States. According to 2024 trade data, roughly 3.8 to 4.3 million barrels of crude oil flow from Canada into the US market every single day. For natural gas, average exports reached about 8.5 billion cubic feet per day, a 7% increase from the previous year. In terms of electricity, total cross-border transmission amounted to approximately 11.4 terawatt-hours. That is enough to power nearly 1 million American households for an entire year. As for uranium, an element of critical importance for nuclear energy, Canada accounts for as much as 27% of total US imports. More than any other country. This ensures that a significant portion of the US nuclear fleet can continue operating reliably. And that is only the energy side of the equation. Canada also holds numerous other strategic minerals that are becoming indispensable in today's high-tech era. All of the critical minerals of Ontario, Carney explains, nickel, for example. Nickel comes from Ontario, it's high grade. And it's not replaceable from other places in the world. High-quality nickel from Ontario has no domestic substitute in the United States. Especially for specialized technological applications, including in the defense sector. Meanwhile, germanium produced in British Columbia plays an essential role in fiber optics, solar cells, and night vision devices. The modern metallurgical facility in Trail is the only source of this material in Canada. These are not commodities the United States or any other country can easily replace. Doing so would require many years of restructuring entire supply chains. If Canada's supply were disrupted, the consequences would be felt almost immediately. Industrial plants would see costs soar. Data centers could face critical shortages. And semiconductor manufacturing facilities might even grind to a standstill. The reality is undeniable. It is extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, to replace the unique combination of proximity, scale, and stability that Canada provides. We can be an energy superpower, Carney declares. We have all the components: nuclear, hydro, and potentially carbon capture and storage. Which is going to be one of the determinants of industrial competitiveness. Prime Minister Mark Carney is not rushing to the signing table. Instead, he has chosen to keep dialogue channels open, while firmly rejecting any terms that could undermine Canada's long-term interests. Rather than conceding, he is accelerating investment in domestic energy and mineral extraction, and strengthening Canada's role with allies beyond North America. By being both willing to cooperate and clear about its autonomy, Carney seeks to demonstrate that Canada is by no means cornered. The message to Washington is unmistakable. Canada's resources may serve as a shared asset, but only if the partnership is built on mutual respect. If the US pushes too far, the consequences could backfire. Without Canadian supply, American industries would face escalating costs, slower growth, and greater dependence on less reliable partners. That would be a precarious scenario for an administration betting on the revival of manufacturing and on global leadership in AI. In this two-way relationship, it is Canada that holds the greater leverage over US economic stability, not the other way around. And now, Mr. Trump must decide, whether sidelining Canada is truly worth whatever gains are on the negotiating table. Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years, Trump said. We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber, because we have our own forests, etc., etc. We don't need their oil and gas, we have more than anybody. I'm being honest, like no one knows what he wants. Including elected officials down here. In early August, Donald Trump ramped up the pressure with a new wave of tariffs. Canada was hit with a 35% levy on goods outside the USMCA framework. The European Union, Japan, and South Korea accepted lower caps in exchange for concessions. Switzerland, after negotiations collapsed, faced tariffs as high as 39%. Mexico, meanwhile, was granted a 90-day extension to reach a deal. But the issue is not merely a matter between individual countries and Washington. Ottawa is under steady pressure from multiple directions. Beijing is actively crafting strategies to erode US influence. And Trump's tariff policy has inadvertently opened up a series of new fronts. Both Canada and China are now seeking smart ways to adapt. Their goal is to weather the short-term shocks caused by these policies, and prepare for the long game. Canada was happy to send its oil south. Nearly all of its crude still flows directly to the United States. It is the one export untouched by tariffs, because Washington knows it cannot afford to block it. Energy security depends on it, millions of barrels every single day, keeping America's systems running, and shielding households from even higher fuel costs. Prime Minister Mark Carney understands this leverage. He has avoided rushing into bad deals. Instead, he is tightening ties with Mexico, expanding export options, and protecting Canadian industries from sudden shocks. The irony is clear. America's greatest weapon is energy, yet it is Canada who ensures the US can keep its lights on. If tariffs were ever placed on this supply, American fuel prices would skyrocket, inflation would surge higher, and Washington would face an economic crisis of its own making. This interdependence buys Canada time to diversify, time to build markets beyond the United States, and time to resist pressure rather than submit to it. But while Canada leans on irreplaceability, China is executing a different play. Reports from the Wall Street Journal reveal Beijing's tightening grip. It dominates global rare earth production, controlling up to 70% of mining, and nearly 90% of refining. These are not just numbers, they are the backbone of US defense. Magnets for jet engines, specialized alloys for weapons, critical components for drones. And now, they are harder and costlier to obtain. Since late 2024, China has been restricting exports of these minerals, driving up costs for US defense contractors, and forcing delays across production lines. For Washington, finding substitutes is slow, expensive, and in many cases, nearly impossible. At the same time, China has been solving its greatest vulnerability, oil dependence. Traditionally, Beijing relied heavily on crude shipped through the Strait of Malacca, a choke point under the constant gaze of the US Navy. But today, that weakness is slowly disappearing. China is importing sanctioned oil at discounted prices, from Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. In 2024 alone, 821,000 barrels per day from Russia, 1.4 million from Iran, 268,000 from Venezuela. This crude feeds smaller domestic refineries, where it is processed and later exported across Asia. The result, low feedstock costs at home, a stable domestic supply, and protection against US sanctions. Beijing has paired this with aggressive investment, massive renewable energy expansion, the world's largest electric vehicle industry, and a growing strategic petroleum reserve. Step by step, China is reducing the leverage America once had, turning a vulnerability into resilience, and transforming sanctioned oil into an economic tool. The contrast is striking. Trump wields tariffs like a blunt weapon, trying to make defiance more painful than compliance. But Canada and China refuse to play by his script. Ottawa leverages its energy lifeline, Beijing secures its supply chains. Neither retaliates with mirror tariffs, both target America's weak spots. Weak spots tariffs cannot touch. The outcome is plain. Costs rise across the US economy, from defense manufacturing, to consumer goods, to everyday energy bills. And for now, there is no clear path to bring those costs down. Trump is chasing quick wins, agreements he can hold up as proof of American strength. By contrast, Carney is choosing patience, a calculated defensive strategy, keeping dialogue open, shielding Canada's core advantages, and refusing hasty concessions that could collapse within months. Xi Jinping's approach is even more deliberate, restructuring entire industries, redesigning supply chains, minimizing damage before the next round of confrontation even begins. The contest has shifted. It is no longer about who can impose higher tariffs, it is about who can endure pressure longer, and who can adapt more effectively under strain. Canada leans on energy leverage and trade diversification, China commands rare minerals and drives an energy transition. Different tactics, but the same goal: to ensure that any US attempt at economic coercion becomes not just difficult, but increasingly costly over time. Trump's tariffs have reshaped the global trade chessboard, but in doing so, they have triggered a counter-response, one so comprehensive that the United States is being forced to spread itself thin, battling on multiple fronts, without ever truly securing the upper hand. This is the effect of Donald Trump's tariffs. Take children's clothing, for example. Prices once set at $6.98, now selling for $10.98, a $4 spike, and just one of many painful increases hitting American families. In the early hours of August 7, 2025, President Donald Trump activated his long-prepared global tariff package. Rates ranged from 10% to 50%. More than 90 countries were affected. America's average import tariff has now climbed above 17%, the highest level since the Great Depression. And Canada, unsurprisingly, was on that list. By August 1, Canadian goods outside the USMCA framework were already facing higher duties. But this was just one part of Trump's sweeping campaign. The European Union, India, Brazil, Mexico all were targeted under his strategy of spreading pressure wide, to force quicker concessions. Yet as the weeks passed, the reverse began to unfold. The US economy itself was now feeling the weight of what it had set in motion. Prices are climbing for American consumers. Automotive costs are surging. According to Cox Automotive, new car prices are projected to rise by 4 to 8% in 2025. Even Ford, with most of its production lines inside the United States, could not escape. Tariffs forced an additional $1 billion in costs, and models assembled in Mexico became even more expensive. The impact spreads further. Yale University studies show footwear prices could rise by 40%. Clothing, by 38%. Tariffs on Vietnam and India have placed international sportswear brands under intense pressure. By late July, Procter & Gamble admitted it could no longer hold the line. Household product prices would rise. Essential goods have been hit hard. European olive oil, Brazilian coffee, now face tariffs of up to 50%. Even Mexican aluminum, vital for beer cans, has become significantly more expensive. At first, some importers tried to absorb the costs. But with razor-thin margins, retailers have warned it cannot last. Walmart has already signaled higher shelf prices, and smaller businesses may be crushed under the weight. Inflation is already strained. And Trump's push to cut interest rates risks delivering a double shock, rising prices with no end in sight. Across the border, Canada is seizing the moment. A "Buy Canadian" movement has taken hold. Grocery stores and supply shops now highlight tags showing if products are made in Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney has kept Canada's 25% retaliatory tariffs in place, targeting US industries with deep political influence. The message is clear: respect must go both ways. And this pressure is being felt in Washington. Corporations are alarmed. Lawmakers hear discontent directly from their constituencies. At home, Premier Doug Ford has amplified the campaign. He is demanding clearer country of origin labeling, calling out corporations that outsource production, and rallying support for domestic manufacturing. This is more than internal politics. It is a message to Washington: Canada's leadership is united, and it will not abandon its industries. Beyond defense, Canada is advancing. Trade diversification is accelerating. Partnerships with the EU, the UK, and Mexico are expanding. Reliance on the US market is shrinking, just as American import costs are rising. Canada has turned a defensive strategy into an offensive one. It is now reshaping the balance of the game. Trump entered August with heavy-handed moves, expecting swift concessions. But instead, his tariffs are backfiring. The burden is shifting back onto US manufacturers and consumers. Meanwhile, Canada holds steady. Retaliatory tariffs remain in place. Domestic production is being strengthened. New markets are being opened. Ottawa is no longer on the defensive. It is at the center of the confrontation. The US still commands the advantage of market size. But Canada holds critical supply chain links, and resources the modern economy cannot live without. The outcome is uncertain. But one reality is undeniable: the very tariffs Trump designed to break Canada have instead created a more level playing field. And within it, Canada has found an opportunity, not just to survive, but to shape the road ahead.